Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact checker, and helping you if you're scared of many things. And this is about World War, as you can see from the title. And it's clear that Putin is not expecting a world war, because he has massively reduced Russia's conventional ability. Now, why would it matter, the conventional ability matter in a world war? Because a lot of people have this idea from movies that somehow, using nuclear weapons, Putin could destroy all of NATO's conventional forces, and then what does he have to worry about? And that's not true at all. So I just want to explain why Russia's reducing its conventional forces matter in a world war. I just need to deal with a couple of misconceptions about about nuclear weapons. By the way, I've got a much longer version of this video. It's about 50 minutes long. I've uploaded it on YouTube. I'm trying a shorter version now. So go for that for more details. So there's two misconceptions. First, the idea that radioactivity is like a fog. And it isn't. And the second misconception is that radioactivity is long-last. Radioactivity from nuclear weapons is lasting, and it isn't. So I'm going to explain those 2 points. So first of all, fallout is called fallout because it falls from the sky. After a nuclear explosion and airburst, then the nuclear materials go up in the air, and there's an awful lot of them, and they are kilometers up in the air, hundreds of meters to kilometers up in the air with a big airburst. And the fallout is literally heavy dust that falls. So light dust is obviously not going to fall, so it's not fallout. And that's just going to get spread out in the atmosphere, and there's background radioactivity anyway. So it's just going to add a little bit to the background radioactivity we have already. You've even got radioactivity in your body. The radioactive potassium, for instance. So the fallout is just the heavy stuff that starts falling out of the sky, and it falls to the ground in about 15 minutes after the explosion. So if you can get indoors, so the instructions are get indoors, stay indoors, and stay tuned. Basic instructions, lots of more detailed instructions. And if you do that, you won't get radiation sickness, as long as you can keep a good distance away from the radioactive dust. And the other thing is about the idea that radioactivity is permanent. It isn't. The radioactivity is due to splitting atoms. If the atoms split very furiously, very, very quickly, that's the most radioactive materials, then they have a very short half-life. So the most fierce, the most intense radioactivity is very short-lived. Some has only got half-lives of seconds after nuclear explosion. That's the most intense of all. But that wouldn't even get down to the ground, most of that. And then it's the radioactive half-lives of like minutes. And then so if you've got a half-life, say, of 3 minutes, then that means that after 30 minutes, you've only got 1,000th left of the original dose, because halves and halves and halves every 3 minutes. And after 60 minutes, you've got only got a minute left. After 90 minutes, you've got about a billionth left of the original radioactivity. So you can see, within an hour or two, an awful lot of the original radioactivity is gone. And so you get the first responders, any who are trained in these situations, and within the first few hours they'd be on the scene with their hazmat suits and with their vehicles, and most of the radioactivity is already gone at that point, as long as you're protected. But if you don't have first responders got to you yet, then you should wait at least 2 days, because by then nearly all the radioactivity is gone. And then you've got long-lasting radioactivity. That's mainly a risk if you eat food or drink milk or water that's been contaminated, especially milk, because it gets concentrated by the cows. So that's longer term. And that mainly is a risk for things like cancers, not radiation sickness. So you can see from that so the main point there was that there would be what did also want to bring in the humanitarian response would come very quickly, and very early on there would be, you have your cell phone towers, they have their own self-contained power supplies, so at least in the first few hours they would be still transmitting you'll still have Wi-Fi, and you still be able, cell phones, sorry, and you still be able to connect back to the internet and still be able to tell the world about what's happening. And a lot of people don't seem to realise these points. And the electricity grid would probably be back pretty quickly. It's pretty robust. It can be restarted after damage. And so this is why there would be a second conventional stage. The movies are just completely wrong. It's not like threads. It's not like you wouldn't have EMP pulses. That's just a science fiction thing. It's not a reality. Not like that. And so there would be a second conventional stage of the nuclear war. And actually, under Trump, the United States changed to having a conventional stage, very much more, no actual immediate nuclear response to a nuclear attack. So they would concentrate on stopping as many of the nukes as possible, and then a conventional response to try to stop Putin from firing any more nukes. So they'd focus in a very practical way on stopping his ability to fire more nukes. They have secret capabilities there which they don't disclose. And then they would focus on various other conventional attacks on Putin. And then we saw during the Ukraine war, and I've gone into more details, lots of details I won't go into these details at all in this short video. Basically the harm, anti-radar things, and the HIMARS just go straight through the Ukrainian defences, the Russian defences. They have literally no air defences against NATO, and they can't shoot down fighter jets because the HARM missiles destroy their radars if they switch them on. So Russia would lose the conventional war that would follow after a nuclear war in about a couple of days. And Putin would be like Saddam Hussein in his foxhole. You may know that Saddam Hussein, after the war, he ended up underground in a tiny little underground cave with a tiny little hole, and he had some loyal people who looked after him for a while, but eventually he was discovered. And that would be a similar situation for Putin. His own people would be against him, and he might survive a little while in a foxhole or something, but he would eventually be brought to justice, or he might be killed in the attempt to capture him, and that would be the end of Putin. So there's no way Putin wants that. And Putin has shown that he doesn't expect a world war with NATO. Right, and so again I explain this in much more detail in a longer video, but right from the very start of the war, Western analysts were very puzzled because Putin didn't preserve. The Russian army, like all armies, is divided up into units of brigades and regiments, and these work as a unit. They're used to working under a particular general, and they're used to working with each other. And Putin doesn't seem to understand this. And he sent a significant fraction of every brigade to the front line, a hodgepodge of lots and lots of different, a few thousand soldiers from this, a few thousand soldiers from that, under a new general, no experience of working under that general before. And that's what he did. And this degraded Russia's capabilities of all its brigades and regiments, because none of them were intact, and they'd all lost significant important experienced soldiers to Russia very early on. And very early on in the war, for some reason, the second in command of the Baltic fleet ended up fighting in Mariupol, street-to-street fighting, and he was killed. Very bizarre. And about half of Putin's generals that he committed to the war were killed in the first few months. I go into some details, and you probably have heard me talk about that before anyway. It's all very bizarre. And so Putin's a terrible strategist. You would just need to go on Twitter, which he obviously doesn't do, and read some of the tweets by the military analysts who all the way through have been analysing all the flaws in all the things he's done wrong. And he would just need to go on Twitter and he could get an education which would prevent him from making these mistakes, but he doesn't do that. And so one very spectacular mistake he made was when the Ukrainians, they cut off the escapes from Izium to the north and to the south, and he had put his first guards, he put his elite army, which he should never have sent to Ukraine at all if he wanted to protect Russia, his elite army that's supposed to protect Russia, and it's the first Guards Tanks army, protects Moscow and protects Russia, he sent that to Russia, to Ukraine, leaving Russia with very little defences against NATO. And half of the tanks were trapped in Izium for this elite tank army, half of the very best tanks that Russia has, and of its most elite tank regiment, one of its two most elite tank regiments were trapped in Izium, and they were trapped there for days, and the Ukrainians first cut off the roads to the north and south, and then they nudged in and they got fire control of the only road off over to the east, and during all that time, which lasted a couple, 2-3 days, can't remember how long, the First Guard Tanks Army regiment that was stuck in Izium was saying to their leader, and presumably Putin told them that they were asking to be permitted to evacuate Izium, and they were told no. And Russia has this top-down approach of very brutal command at the top that commands that the people at the bottom, they're just afraid to do anything else except what the commander says. It's a very dysfunctional army, and so they just stayed there. And Russia ended up capturing an entire brigade's worth of tanks, 36 of which they left in perfect operating order, which are now being used, out of nearly 100, they're now being used by Ukraine to fight against Russia. This is very, very bizarre. So you can see from that Putin is a terrible strategist, and he's doing just the same again now with Kherson, with the Crimea bridge cut, then that's the supplies not just for Kherson but also for the east bank of Kherson, which could have helped support Kherson. That's all cut off, and Ukrainians are clearly setting up to capture Kherson. And just as with Izium, Putin has told his 15,000 soldiers in Kherson not to evacuate across the Dnieper River. So they're stuck there, their tanks can no longer got any fuel, so they're just stuck, static camp tanks, an awful lot of them, and they're just sitting there waiting for the Ukrainians to attack them. And then there's some soldiers trying to stop the Ukrainians from attacking Kherson, and Putin has told them just to stay there and not to retreat. So it seems in the near future we're going to have another spectacular failure by Russia, losing vast amounts of military equipment and thousands of soldiers in Kherson. And so far Russia's not doing a blind thing to stop it. Extremely bizarre. If that does happen, and it may happen in the next, it seems it's the most obvious reason for the Kerch Bridge, then that's the end of, that's really a very significant blow for. So this is why we not only expect Russia to lose, but the military analysts are saying, look where it's going so far in this war, it's going to lose very quickly. And it's not a blind thing Putin can do. So I've talked about, and yes, I use the analogy of, I'm just looking at my notes at some particular points. I think I've said everything. Talked about the office, and lost most of the office. I took that much more detail in the longer video, and I gave the example of Smaug, and it's like the dragon, Smaug the dragon in Bilbo the Hobbit, and Bilbo, he sees his first encounter with an early encounter with the dragon, then he gets the dragon to spread out its wings and show its magnificent armour, and the dragon does that out of pride, and Bilbo's main reason for doing that is he's heard that there's a great big bear patch, and actually he sees there's a great big bear patch under his shoulder, on his breast, under his shoulder, where he's got no defences. Well, Russia has done that in Ukraine, and he's shown that its air defences are useless. It's shown that it's got no defence against harm, it's got no defence against HIMARS, and so we can see that Russia doesn't expect, he's not preparing, he doesn't expect a world war himself, and the US defence, they say over and over again, they see no preparations for using nukes, and it's clear he'd lose very quickly and be very humiliating for Putin. And then when it comes to tactical nukes, then tactical nukes would be absolutely rubbish for the war, because like with the fallout, as I explained with the humanitarian missions, then within within an hour or two, the Ukrainians would be able to drive over with their Humvees, which are fully enclosed, just drive through the fallout. So it wouldn't really create that much of a barrier for the Ukrainians, and the Russians would be in a terrible position. They'd get problems of their untrained soldiers not knowing how to fight, how to deal with fallout, and tanks which are much more slow moving. So tactical nukes would be useless as on the battlefield. Then the one remaining possibility is whether Putin might use tactical nukes in order to terrorize the Russians, just like he has used trying to attack civilians, obviously a war crime, and he would do this because for his domestic audience, it would be really stupid and hopeless. China and India would be completely opposed to him, but he might do it because he's got such a strong focus on his own domestic audience, as a kind of revenge thing, as a kind of saying, no, look how big I am, so I can use nukes, as it were, which for some people in Russia is supposedly impressive. It was notable that after the Kerch Bridge, these mill bloggers who have talked in vague ways about using tactical nukes, they didn't suggest a tactical nuke as a response to even the most bloodthirsty, didn't talk about tactical nukes as a response to the Kerch Bridge. So it might be that when push comes to shove, that's an English expression, that they wouldn't actually think tactical nukes are a good idea. But that would be the only reason why Putin might do it. And also if, as Zelensky said, Russia's never going to use nukes, and Putin as an inadequate man might say, well, really? I'll show you. So it's just kind of like that sort of bravissimo or whatever, that he might use nukes. So in order to make sure that Putin won't do that either, then the United States under Jake Sullivan has conveyed to Putin that if he used that, the result would be catastrophic to Russia. They're not talking about nukes. Catastrophic to Putin. And then General Petraeus has talked in a little bit more detail that there would have been targets in Ukraine, Crimea, and the Black Sea, specific targets that Jake Sullivan has likely conveyed to Putin through high-ups in Russia. And in the Black Sea, that could only be the Black Sea Fleet. And from what we've seen of Russia's total inability to stop the missiles from NATO, its inability to stop HIMARS, then one example would be that NATO would probably be able to destroy it's like Russia uses one possible response that Jake Sullivan could have communicated to Russia would be that if you use a tactical nuke against Ukraine to terrorize the Ukrainians, then within half an hour all the ships in your Black Sea Fleet would be sinking. Just like the Moskva did, which Ukraine was able to do with just a couple of Neptune sea-skimming missiles. And with Moskva gone, they've lost their air defences, and their air defences seem pretty useless anyway. So that might be one example. So this is why it was vanishingly unlikely, and this I think pretty much underscores it's extraordinarily unlikely that Putin, having been told a message like that, and he would know full well that his radar is not stopping the HIMARS missiles. So Ukraine is just using these HIMARS missiles and they're just hitting wherever they like, and Russia can't do a thing. and whatever hit the Kerch Bridge is probably a missile. It's very good evidence it was a missile, and again a missile that all the defences, they put the very best defences Russia has to try to defend Kerch Bridge, and it couldn't stop whatever hit it, and it's very clear evidence it was actually a missile. The people on Twitter give evidence of other things, but it seems very likely it was ATACMS or something like it. So that's why it's just, there's no way that Putin is preparing for a world war, and he knows himself and the United States defense repeats over and over, and so then and there's exceptionally unlikely he uses a tactical nuke. Once I really heard these extra bits about what General Petraeus said was really underscored that. Always had been vanishingly almost zero probability. Now it seems extraordinary. I don't think he's going to do that. So then you wonder about why do the media then keep talking about nuclear war? Well, I think part of it is they just don't know, the journalists. For some reason, what I've explained to you, you go and look, and I follow the very best military analysts in the world. It's remarkable that we can do this. Military strategists, professors of military strategy, defense analysts, defense correspondents, and the US defense and the UK defense, and all these people. But the message doesn't seem to be publicised very much by the mass media, that this is how weak Russia is. I don't know why. And then there are politicians who they want the money and the support for the weapons to send to Ukraine, and they've got very good reasons for doing that, because they can't, to protect Ukraine, the war crimes, and that Russia would, if they let Russia win in Ukraine, it also would mean that using war crimes would mean that it's a way to win wars. But they kind of shortcut all that reasoning and just get a very quick, just by saying, we're stopping nuclear war. It gives them a very quick soundbite that kind of shortcuts all the very excellent reasons they have for supporting Ukraine, and makes it much simpler to kind of sell it to the people. It just sort of lets them say something in just 10 words when they could be talking for 5 or 10 minutes to try to explain. So Zelensky, he talks about how Ukraine is stopping World War, and it's just a kind of shortcut way of indicating all this, that actually the real reasons why they're stopping Russia. If you go and look at the most knowledgeable people, it's very clear that Russia is not preparing, and he does not expect a world war, and that it's been made very clear to him about the tactical nukes too. So anyway, I've got a much longer video about all this. This is a kind of intermediate way. I might try a very short one. I find it very difficult to do very short ones, but this hopefully this helped some of you. I talk about many more things in the longer video. I'll stop now in order to keep this one reasonably short.